He took everything when he left. But he made one mistake. He didn't read the fine print on the deed for the worthless land my father left me, and he had no idea about the forge that was hidden there. When I turned 18, my world didn't open up with possibility, it slammed shut. The man I thought I loved, the one who had been my anchor for 2 years, didn't just break my heart. He dismantled my life with the cold precision of a demolition crew. He took the small inheritance my mother had scrimped and saved for me. He took the apartment we shared, the one his name was on. He took everything that could be quantified, monetized, and transferred. But in his rush to secure his victory, he missed one thing. A single archaic clause in a yellowed, forgotten deed. He missed the one inheritance that couldn't be put in a bank account. What I discovered on that broken-down piece of land wouldn't just give me a second chance. It would give me back a father I never knew, and a future I could build with my own 2 hands. If you've ever had to start over from absolute zero, if you've ever had to claw your way back from a betrayal that left you with nothing but the clothes on your back, then hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. We're building a place here for people who understand that the deepest foundations are the ones you lay yourself, long after the storm has passed. The air in the bus station tasted of diesel fumes and disinfectant. It was 3 in the morning, a hollowed-out hour where the only other people awake were ghosts like me, drifting between one life and the next. I had one duffel bag at my feet, containing a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a worn paperback I'd read a dozen times. In my hands, I clutched a large manila envelope, its edges soft with age. Inside was the deed. The only thing Leo had graciously let me keep. "It's worthless, Ilera," he'd said, his voice stripped of all the warmth it had held just a week before. We were standing in the doorway of what had been our apartment. His new life was already moving in behind him, in the form of neatly packed boxes that weren't mine. The taxes are past due, it's in the middle of nowhere, and there's nothing on it but a shack that's probably fallen down by now. But it's yours. From your dad, a clean break. A clean break. The words echoed in the sterile quiet of the bus station. It wasn't a break, it was an amputation. Leo was 4 years older than me. I met him when I was 16, a few months after my grandmother, my last living relative, had passed away. I was adrift, about to be swallowed by the foster care system, and he and his family seemed like a lifeboat. They took me in. He was charming, steady, and protective. He helped me navigate the complexities of probate, of dealing with my grandmother's small estate. He helped me set up my first bank account when my mom's life insurance policy finally paid out on my 18th birthday. He held my hand and told me he'd take care of everything. And I, stupid, grateful, and desperately in love, believed him. I signed the papers he put in front of me, giving him power of attorney to help manage things until I was more on my feet. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't think I had to. You don't read the fine print with the person you plan to spend your life with. The day after my birthday, the day the money was officially mine, the lifeboat revealed itself to be a trap. The man I loved became a stranger. The bank account was empty. The legal documents I'd signed were ironclad. He had done it all by the book. His book. "It's for the best," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. "You're too impulsive with money. I'm protecting you from yourself. Think of it as payment for the last 2 years. Payment for giving me a home, for feeding me, for keeping me out of the system. My entire inheritance, my mother's legacy, reduced to room and board. The coldness of it was more shocking than the theft itself. He had planned it. For months, maybe years. He had waited for me to turn 18, like a predator waiting for its prey to come of age. So there I was, 18 years old and homeless, with less than $200 in my pocket, and a deed to a patch of dirt in a part of Oregon I'd only ever seen on a map. My father's land. A man who was a ghost to me, a name on a birth certificate, and a few hazy, half-formed memories of a scratchy beard and the smell of sawdust. He died in a car accident when I was 5. My mom never talked about him. And after she passed, my grandmother was even quieter on the subject. He was just a void, a question mark in my history. and this piece of land was his only answer. I sat on the hard plastic bench, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and I felt a cold, hard knot of nothing in my stomach. I could sell it. A quick call to a rural real estate agent had confirmed Leo's assessment. It was worth maybe $10,000, minus the back taxes. Enough to get a security deposit on a tiny apartment somewhere, maybe buy a few weeks of groceries. It was the sensible option, the only option. But as the bus to Portland finally hissed to a stop outside, I bought a ticket heading east instead, towards the mountains, towards a shack that had probably already fallen down. It wasn't a choice born of hope. It was a choice born of pure, unadulterated defiance. If my life was going to be nothing, I wanted to see the nothing my father had left me. I wanted to stand on it and feel it under my feet. The $200 I had was a pathetic shield against the world. It was the last of my cash from a part-time waitressing job, money Leo hadn't known about. It felt like the only thing in the world that was truly mine. As I sat in that bus station, I portioned it out in my head. $86 for the bus ticket to a town called Oak Ridge, the closest stop to the property listed on the deed. That left me with a little over $100. Food, a phone call, maybe a cheap motel if I couldn't make it to the property before dark. It was a terrifyingly small number, a thin thread suspending me over a chasm of absolute destitution. The system I had aged out of was gone. There were no more social workers to call, no more group homes to be placed in. I was an adult, free, and completely, utterly alone. My history with Leo felt like a fever dream now. He had been my world. His family's house was warm, loud, and full of the casual chaos of a life I'd never known. My own childhood had been quiet, shadowed by my mother's long illness and then the silent, grieving stillness of my grandmother's apartment. The noise, the laughter, the easy affection of Leo's family, it was intoxicating. I had mistaken their hospitality for love, their charity for family. I see that now. They saw a project, a sad, pretty girl who needed saving. And Leo, their golden boy, was the designated savior. He coached me on what to wear, how to talk. He smoothed my rough edges, molded me into someone who could fit neatly into their suburban Christmas card photos. I was so grateful, so eager to please, that I didn't see the cage being built around me. He'd talk about our future, about the house we'd buy, the life we'd build. He used my mother's inheritance as the foundation for those dreams. "We'll invest it, Alara," he'd say, his voice smooth as honey. "Make it grow. Your mom would want that." He was right. She would have. She just wouldn't have wanted him to be the one doing it. The deed itself was a relic. The paper was thick, almost like cloth, and the type was faint, struck by an old typewriter. Parcel 7, Section 12, Township 34 South, Range 6 East, Willamette Meridian. It sounded like a pirate's map. It detailed the acreage, 5.5 acres, and its location, miles down a county road that, according to the map on my phone, turned to gravel and then simply faded away. Tucked at the bottom of the legal description was a single, handwritten line, added and notarized years after the original purchase, including all structures and improvements thereon, specifically the primary dwelling, cabin, and associated outbuilding, workshop. Leo had seen the word cabin and fixated on it. He'd laughed. "A log cabin? Seriously? Your dad was some kind of mountain man, huh?" He dismissed the outbuilding as a woodshed or a collapsed garage. Irrelevant, worthless. As I held the envelope, the paper felt warm against my cold hands. This was all that was left of him. My father, Michael. A man I remembered in flashes. The scent of pine and something metallic, like hot iron. The deep rumble of his laugh. A calloused hand holding mine. These were not memories. They were sensory fragments, echoes without context. My mother, when I was very young and she was still healthy enough to talk about the past, had once said he worked with his hands. She'd said it with a mixture of pride and sadness. After he was gone, the subject was closed. It was as if he'd never existed. Now, this land was the only proof he ever had. The thought of selling it to a stranger, of letting it be bulldozed for a vacation home or a timber lease, felt like a second death. It felt like betraying a ghost I didn't even know. That feeling, more than any logic or planning, was what put me on that bus. I wasn't running towards something. I was refusing to run away. I had to see it. I had to stand on his ground and decide if there was anything there worth saving, or if, like everything else in my life, it was just another ruin. The bus pulled away from the curb, and the city lights began to blur through the rain-streaked window. I was heading into the dark, armed with nothing but a broken heart and a pirate map. The bus ride was a long, slow surrender to motion. For 12 hours, I watched the world change through the grimy window. The sprawling, concrete arteries of the city gave way to the repetitive geometry of the suburbs, which in turn dissolved into wide, flat farmland. Then, slowly, the land began to buck and rise. The flatlands crumpled into foothills, green and rolling, and then the real mountains appeared, jagged and dark against the bruised purple of the dawn sky. The Cascades. They looked like a wall built to keep the world out or to keep something precious hidden within. With every mile, the air inside the bus seemed to get thinner, and the weight in my chest grew heavier. The other passengers were a silent collection of the transient and the tired. A young soldier sleeping with his head against the window, a mother trying to quiet a fussy baby, an old man staring blankly ahead. We were all in transit, suspended between where we had been and where we were going. No one spoke to me. I was invisible, just another girl with a sad story in her eyes, and I was grateful for it. My phone was my only connection to the world I had left, and its battery was dying. I watched the little green bar shrink with a sense of rising panic. I'd used it to look up the town, Oak Ridge. The pictures showed a small, gritty logging town nestled in a deep valley, surrounded by endless forests of Douglas fir. It looked quiet and forgotten, a place where you could disappear. The satellite view of my father's property was just a fuzzy green square. No structures were visible through the dense canopy of trees. For all I knew, Leo was right. It could be nothing more than a tangle of blackberry bushes and fallen logs. What was I doing? This was insane. I should have taken the money for the deed, however little it was. I should have found a room to rent in Portland, gotten another waitressing job, and tried to piece together some semblance of a normal life. Every rational thought screamed at me to get off at the next stop, turn around, and go back. But the memory of Leo's face, that placid mask of false concern, was like fuel. The humiliation was a fire in my gut. He expected me to fail. He expected me to come crawling back, or to simply vanish. Another piece of unfortunate backstory he could tell his new girlfriend about. The thought of proving him wrong was a tiny, hard ember glowing in the vast darkness of my fear. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me in my seat. When the bus finally rolled into Oak Ridge, the sun was low in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the valley. The town was even smaller than I'd imagined. One main street, lined with a handful of storefronts, a grocery store with a flickering sign, a tavern with neon beer logos in the window, a hardware store, and a post office. The air smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and wood smoke from a nearby mill. It was a clean, sharp smell, so different from the city's perpetual exhaust. It felt like I'd arrived in another century. The bus driver gave me a sympathetic look as I stepped off. "This is it, kid. End of the line." He pointed down the street. "Good luck." I shouldered my duffel bag and walked. My destination was still 5 miles away, according to the faded county map I'd screenshotted on my phone. 5 miles down a road that branched off the main highway and dwindled into nothing. There were no taxis, no Ubers, no bus service. There was just me and the pavement. I started walking, my worn sneakers slapping against the asphalt. The walk was a forced meditation. The sun dipped below the western ridge, and the temperature dropped. The sky turned from orange to a deep, star-dusted indigo. The sounds of the town faded behind me, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the whisper of wind in the towering fir trees that lined the road. It was a profound and terrifying quiet. For the first time, the reality of my isolation hit me with physical force. There was no one to call. No one was coming for me. No one even knew where I was. My fear was a cold, living thing, wrapping itself around my throat. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other. That was all I could do. After about an hour, the asphalt gave way to gravel, as predicted. The road narrowed, and the forest pressed in on both sides, its branches interlocking overhead to form a dark tunnel. My phone was dead. I was navigating by memory and a gut feeling. I passed a rusted, bullet-pocked sign that read, "No trespassing." The road got rougher, more of a trail than a road, and I had to pick my way around deep ruts and fallen branches. My legs ached. My shoulders burned from the weight of the bag. I was exhausted, hungry, and on the verge of tears. I was about to give up, to just sit down on the side of the trail and wait for morning, when I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, was the dark, angular shape of a roof. A cabin. It was real. It was still standing. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. I pushed through a final thicket of ferns and sticker bushes and stumbled into a small clearing. And there it was, my inheritance. It was worse than I could have imagined, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The cabin sagged. That was the first word that came to mind. It looked like an old man slumping in his chair, tired of holding himself up. The roof on one side dipped dramatically, a cascade of moss-covered shingles threatening to slide off completely. The porch had collapsed, its boards splintered and gray. The windows were dark, vacant eyes, one of them shattered, a jagged black mouth gaping open. The whole clearing was choked with weeds and blackberry vines, which snaked their way up the log walls of the cabin, as if trying to pull it back into the earth. It was a picture of perfect neglect. And yet, it was here. It had weathered storms and decades of solitude, waiting. For what? For me, I supposed. My heart pounded a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I dropped my bag on the damp ground and approached the front door, stepping carefully over the wreckage of the porch. The door was made of thick, heavy planks, bound with rusted iron straps. There was no doorknob, just a simple iron latch. I put my hand on it, expecting it to be locked, but it lifted with a groan of protest. The door swung inward on complaining hinges, opening into a square of absolute darkness. The smell that billowed out was thick and ancient, the scent of damp, decaying wood, of mouse droppings, of stagnant air, and underneath it all, the faint, ghostly aroma of cold ashes. I stood on the threshold, peering into the blackness. I didn't have a flashlight. My phone was dead. I was about to turn away, to resign myself to a cold night spent huddled on the ruined porch, when a sliver of moonlight pierced the gloom through the broken window, illuminating a small section of the interior. I took a breath and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked ominously under my weight, but they held. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. The cabin was one single room. In the center of the moonlight's patch was a simple wooden table and 2 chairs. Against the far wall, I could just make out the shape of a bed frame, stripped bare. To my left was a hulking, pot-bellied wood stove, its pipe running up through the ceiling. Dust lay over everything like a fine gray shroud. Cobwebs, thick as cotton, hung from the rafters. It was a scene of profound abandonment. I walked slowly, my hands outstretched, feeling my way through the dark. I ran my fingers over the rough surface of the table, across the cold iron of the stove. This was his. My father's. He had built this. He had sat at this table. He had slept in that bed. The thought sent a strange shiver through me. I wasn't just in a cabin, I was inside a memory. I explored the perimeter of the room, my hands brushing against the log walls. In the corner, next to the bed frame, my fingers found something else, a wooden chest. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, and bound with the same kind of iron straps as the door. It had a heavy, ornate lock on the front. It was too heavy to be empty. My curiosity battled with my exhaustion. I tried to lift it, but it was wedged tight in the corner. I knelt down, my knees complaining on the gritty floor, and tugged at it. It wouldn't budge. Frustrated, I ran my hands over the floorboards around it. One of them felt loose. I dug my fingernails into the crack and pulled. The board lifted with a surprising lack of resistance. It wasn't nailed down. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I set the board aside and reached into the dark space beneath. My fingers closed around something solid and cold. Not the chest, something else. I pulled it out. It was a metal box, slick with condensation. It was heavy. And it was locked. I felt a surge of adrenaline that banished my fatigue. This was a clue, a real, tangible piece of a puzzle. But the chest was still there, and it felt more immediate. I returned my attention to it, pulling and wiggling until it finally broke free from the corner with a scraping sound. I dragged it out into the patch of moonlight. The lock was old and rusted. I had no key. I looked around the cabin desperately. On the mantelpiece above the cold fireplace, I saw a glint of metal. A fire poker. It was thin and heavy. I took it, inserted the tip into the keyhole of the lock, and pried. The metal of the lock was old and brittle. With a sharp crack, it broke. My hands were trembling as I lifted the lid. The inside was lined with faded red velvet, and nestled within were three things. The first was a set of heavy, old-fashioned iron keys on a simple ring. They were intricate, a far cry from modern keys. The second was a small, tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. I opened it. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of a smiling, bearded man holding a baby. My father. And me. My heart squeezed tight in my chest. On the other side was a lock of my own baby hair, pale and fine. The third item was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a blob of dark red wax. My name was written on the front in a strong, elegant script I didn't recognize. For Ilara, on her 18th birthday. I stared at it, my world tilting on its axis. He had known. He had planned this. This wasn't just a forgotten relic, it was a message in a bottle, sent across 15 years of silence, waiting for me to arrive. I carefully broke the wax seal with my thumb and pulled out the folded pages within. The paper was crisp, the ink a dark, bold black. I angled the letter to catch the moonlight and began to read. My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, it means several things. It means you are 18. It means you have found your way here. And it means I am not there to give this to you myself. For that, I am more sorry than words can ever say. I know you must have 1,000 questions. I know you have likely grown up believing I abandoned you. I need you to know that isn't the truth. The truth is, leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I did it to protect you. When you were born, my life was complicated. Before I was your father, I was a blacksmith. Not the kind you see at Renaissance fairs, shoeing horses. I was an artist, and my medium was steel. I made things, gates, sculptures, furniture, for people with a lot of money and very little patience. Some of those people were not the kind you want in your life. I made a bad deal, got into debt with the wrong man, and when I couldn't pay, he made it clear that my debt would be passed on to the people I loved. To your mother, to you. The threats were not subtle. So I disappeared. I cut all ties, gave your mother every penny I had, and made her promise to tell you I was gone for good. It was the only way to ensure they would leave you alone, to sever the connection they could use against me. It broke my heart, but it kept you safe. That was the only thing that mattered. I came here, to this land. I bought it years before, with the first money I ever made from a big commission. It was my dream, our dream, to build a life here, away from the city. I built this cabin with my own hands, felled the trees, and set the stones for the hearth. I thought we would live here together. After I left, I lived here for a while, like a ghost in my own future. But I couldn't stay. The risk of being found was too great. So I prepared this place for you. A contingency, a last resort, an inheritance of a different kind. Now, about this property. The deed is more important than it looks. I'm sure whoever you've dealt with in the outside world has told you this land is worthless. They are wrong. They only see the 5 acres and the dilapidated cabin. They don't know what else is here. Look at the deed again. The addendum I added. Associated Outbuildings/Workshop. That is the key. When I built the cabin, I also built my forge. From the outside, it looks like a collapsed barn or a storage shed, overgrown and forgotten. That is by design. It's on the north side of the property, about 100 yards from the cabin, tucked into the hillside. One of the keys in the chest you found opens the main door. It will be rusted, but it will work. Inside that forge, Alara, is my entire life's work. My tools, my anvil, my hearth, my hammers. Everything I used to create. It's all there, waiting. It's probably a dusty, spider-filled mess, but it's solid. I built it to last. This is the real inheritance. Not money, which can be stolen or spent. Not property, which can be sold. A craft, a skill, the ability to take something raw and worthless in the eyes of the world, a lump of iron, a piece of scrap, and shape it with fire and force into something strong, useful, and beautiful. That is a power no one can ever take from you. I know this is a lot to ask. I am a stranger to you, a ghost leaving you a pile of rust and a falling down building. You are 18, and you deserve a life free of all this baggage. So I am giving you a choice. Inside the forge, behind a loose stone on the left side of the hearth, there is a metal box. Inside that box is $10,000 in cash. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. It's enough to pay the back taxes, sell this land, and start a new life somewhere else. You can take it and go. There is no shame in that. You owe me nothing. Walk away, go to college, travel the world, forget all about this place and the strange man who was your father. I will understand. Or, you can stay. You can use that money to buy food and fuel. You can clean out the forge. You can find the books and journals I left for you, and you can learn. You can pick up a hammer and feel its weight in your hand. You can light the fire. You can take the ugliest, most stubborn material on earth, and you can bend it to your will. You can build something for yourself. The choice, my sweet girl, is yours and yours alone. Whatever you decide, know this. Every day of my life, I loved you. Every swing of my hammer was for you. You were the fire in my own forge. Your father, Michael. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking so badly the words blurred. The moonlight was not enough. I needed to see it, to feel the paper, to trace the signature. I stumbled back to my duffel bag and fumbled for the small book of matches I always carried. I struck one. The tiny flame flared to life, a fragile, defiant star in the oppressive darkness of the cabin. In its flickering light, I read the letter again. The words were real. The ink was real. This wasn't a dream. Grief, hot and sudden, punched the air from my lungs. It wasn't the distant, hazy grief for a father who had died long ago. It was a fresh, sharp, devastating grief for the man who had written this letter. The man who had loved me enough to leave me. The man who had built this cabin, who had hidden a future for me in a rusty metal box. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart after Leo's betrayal crumbled into dust. The numbness that had been my shield for days dissolved, and a tidal wave of feeling crashed over me. I cried. I sank to the dusty floor, clutching the letter to my chest, and I sobbed. Deep, ragged, soul-tearing sobs. I cried for the baby in the locket who never got to know her father. I cried for the young man who had to give up his child to save her. I cried for the years of silence and misunderstanding, and I cried for the girl sitting on the floor of a ruined cabin, holding a map to a life she couldn't have imagined, a life that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The match burned down, singeing my fingers. I dropped it, and the darkness rushed back in. But it was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the presence of my father, with the weight of his love and his sacrifice. The anger at Leo was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but it was smaller now, eclipsed by this much larger, more profound emotion. Leo had taken money. My father had given me a choice, a legacy. After a long time, the tears subsided, leaving me hollowed out and strangely calm. The moon had moved across the sky, and its light now fell on a different part of the room. I stood up, my legs stiff, and walked towards the door. The keys from the chest felt heavy and real in my pocket. The letter had given me directions, the north side of the property, 100 yards from the cabin, tucked into the hillside. I stepped outside. The night air was cold and clean. The stars were a brilliant, scattered dust of diamonds against black velvet. I took a deep breath, the pine-scented air filling my lungs, and I started walking. The clearing around the cabin was small, but beyond it, the forest was thick. I pushed my way through ferns that were as tall as I was, their wet fronds soaking my jeans. I stumbled over roots and rocks, using my hands to guide me in the near-total darkness under the trees. I had no idea if I was going in the right direction. I was just moving, propelled by the force of my father's words. I kept going until the ground began to slope upwards. A hillside. I was at the base of a small, steep hill. I started to climb, grabbing onto tree trunks and roots to pull myself up. And then I saw it. Or rather, I felt it. A flat, vertical surface where there should have been sloping earth and trees. It was a wall, made of stone and thick, dark wood. It was almost completely covered in a curtain of ivy, so dense that it looked like part of the hill itself. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a geological feature, a cliff face. This was it. The camouflage was perfect. I ran my hands over the ivy, pulling it away. Underneath, I found the outline of a massive door, at least 10 feet tall, made of the same heavy planks as the cabin door, reinforced with a grid of iron bars. In the center was a huge iron ring for a handle and a keyhole that looked big enough to swallow my fist. It was a door built to withstand a siege. I pulled the keys from my pocket. There were 3 of them. One was small and intricate. The other 2 were large, heavy, and looked almost medieval. I tried the first of the large keys. It slid into the lock with a grating sound. I put both hands on it and turned. For a moment, nothing happened. The key wouldn't budge. I threw my entire weight against it, groaning with the effort, and then, with a deep, echoing crack that sounded like a breaking bone, the rusted mechanism inside gave way. The lock turned. I grabbed the iron ring, planted my feet, and pulled. The door was impossibly heavy. It didn't swing. It scraped, groaning across a stone floor, opening just enough for me to slip through. I squeezed through the gap and into the darkness within. The air inside was cold and still and smelled powerfully of cold iron, coal dust, and time. It was a smell I recognized, a ghost of a scent from my earliest memories. The smell of my father. I stood just inside the door, letting my eyes adjust. There were no windows, The only light was the faint starlight filtering through the crack in the door behind me. But it was enough. The space was cavernous. The ceiling soared high above me, lost in shadow. I could make out huge, hulking shapes in the gloom. In the center of the vast room stood a massive block of steel, the anvil. It rested on a giant stump of an oak tree, its surface smooth and dark. To its left was the hearth, a brick and stone structure easily 10 feet wide, with a vast gaping mouth and a chimney that disappeared into the darkness above. Bellows the size of a small car were tucked beside it. All around the walls, tools were hanging in neat, orderly rows, hammers of every size and shape, tongs with long, spindly arms, chisels, punches, files. They were shrouded in a delicate lacework of cobwebs, but they were there. They were ready. This was no workshop. This was a cathedral, a temple dedicated to fire and steel. The scale of it was breathtaking. My father hadn't just been a blacksmith, he'd been a master. This place was his life's ambition, built with a skill and a seriousness that humbled me. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing in the immense quiet. I ran my hand over the anvil. It was cold as ice, but I could almost feel the phantom vibrations of 1,000 hammer blows. I touched the leather of the bellows, cracked and dry with age. I picked up a hammer from the wall. It was heavier than it looked, perfectly balanced. The wooden handle was smooth and dark, worn into gentle curves that fit my hand perfectly. This was a tool that had been used, and used well. This was an extension of his arm. Holding it felt intimate, like holding his hand. I stood there in the center of the forge, holding my father's hammer, and I felt the full weight of the choice he had given me. The $10,000. The sensible path. The path back to a world I understood. A world of apartments and paychecks and forgetting. I could be on a bus back to Portland by tomorrow afternoon. I could find a roommate, get a job, enroll in community college. I could build a normal life, a safe life, far away from this strange, demanding legacy. The money was a key to a door marked exit. It was the easy way out. And God, I wanted the easy way out. I was tired. I was grieving. I was 18 years old, and I had already lost more than most people lose in a lifetime. I didn't want another fight. I just wanted to be safe. But then I looked around the forge, at the anvil that had waited patiently in the dark, at the hearth that was built to hold a roaring fire, at the tools that were hungry for work. This place wasn't just a building. It was a promise. It was a testament to a love so fierce it had chosen exile over endangerment. It was the heart of a man I was only just beginning to know. To take the money and run would feel like theft. It would feel like siding with Leo, like agreeing that the only thing of value was the cash. It would be a betrayal of the man who had trusted me with his soul. I stood there for a long time, caught between two futures. One was a well-lit, paved road. The other was a dark, overgrown path leading into an unknown wilderness. The choice was between safety and meaning. I want to pause here for a second, because I think we all come to a crossroads like that, sooner or later. Maybe it's not a hidden forge and a letter from a ghost. Maybe it's a job you hate, but that pays the bills. A relationship that's comfortable, but slowly draining your soul. A choice between the thing you're supposed to do and the thing your heart is screaming at you to do. The easy path feels wrong, and the right path feels impossible. If you've ever stood at that kind of crossroads, if you know that feeling of being torn in two, let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I think it's important we all know we're not alone in those moments. The world pushes us towards easy, but sometimes the best parts of ourselves are forged in the fire of the difficult choice. Now, let's get back to the story. I found the loose stone he'd described. It was on the left side of the massive hearth, indistinguishable from the others unless you knew what to look for. I wedged my fingers into the cracks and pulled. It came free, revealing a dark, square cavity. Inside was the metal box I had found under the floor of the cabin. The smallest, most intricate key on the ring fit the lock. I turned it, and the lid popped open. Inside, stacked in neat, tight bundles, was the money. Old bills, soft to the touch. I counted it. $10,000. Exactly as he'd said. It was more money than I had ever held in my life. It was a passport. It was freedom. Underneath the cash was a small, leather-bound journal. I lifted it out. The cover was worn smooth. I opened it. The pages were filled with the same strong script as the letter, but this was different. These were not words for me. These were words for him. There were sketches of elaborate gates, flowing, organic forms that looked more like vines than iron. There were designs for sculptures, for tools, for chandeliers. And there were notes. Notes on metallurgy, on forge welding, on the proper temperature for tempering steel. He wrote about the soul of the metal, about listening to it, about convincing it to take a new shape rather than forcing it. He was an engineer, a chemist, an artist, and a philosopher. The journal was the key to his mind. The money made the choice terrifyingly real. It wasn't an abstract idea anymore. I could walk out of here, right now, and my problems would be solved. I could have a warm bed tonight, a hot meal. I wouldn't have to sleep on the floor of a collapsing cabin. I wouldn't have to figure out how to light a forge that had been cold for 15 years. I took the box and the journal and walked back to the cabin as the first hint of dawn was painting the eastern sky gray. I didn't sleep. I sat at the rough wooden table, the money piled in front of me, and I read my father's journal by the growing light. I read about his passion, his frustration, his triumphs. I read about a man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, shaped by fire and will. He wasn't just making things, he was breathing life into them. Morning came, a brilliant, clear, cold morning. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was exhausted, but my mind was clear. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer in control. I neatly stacked the money and put it back in the metal box. I closed the lid, locked it, and slid it back into its hiding place under the floorboards. Then I stood up. I walked out of the cabin and back to the forge. The huge door was still ajar. I slipped back inside. The place looked different in the daylight that now streamed through the opening. I could see the grime, the rust, the decay. The task ahead was monumental. It was impossible. I looked around, at the hammers on the wall, at the silent anvil, at the cold, waiting hearth. I saw a long-handled broom leaning against the wall. Its bristles were stiff and clogged with ancient dust. I picked it up. The wood was rough against my palms. I took a deep breath, the cold, metallic air filling my lungs, and I started sweeping. The rhythmic scrape of the broom against the stone floor was the only sound. It was the sound of a decision being made, not with words, but with action. I was staying. I was going to light the fire. The first week was a blur of brutal, back-breaking work. Cleaning the forge was an archaeological dig. I swept away layers of dust, dirt, and animal droppings that felt decades thick. I battled cobwebs that were as strong as fishing line. I hauled out rusted buckets, rotted scraps of leather, and the skeletal remains of unfortunate rodents. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. My hands, soft from a life lived mostly indoors, were raw and blistered within hours. At night, I would collapse onto a pile of old blankets I'd found and aired out in the cabin, too tired to even feel the cold. I ate cold canned beans and stale crackers I'd bought with a $20 bill from the box. It was a miserable existence, and I had never felt more alive. On the third day, I made my first trip into town. I walked the 5 miles, feeling conspicuous in my dirty jeans and with my wild, unwashed hair. My destination was the county administration building, a squat, uninspiring brick structure. I walked up to the clerk's office, my heart pounding. I was terrified they would ask questions I couldn't answer, that they would see me as the fraud I felt I was. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a tired smile. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked. "I'd like to pay the back taxes on a property," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I gave her the parcel number from the deed. She typed it into her computer, her brow furrowed. "Parcel 7. Michael O'Connell's old place. Haven't seen anyone pay on that parcel in years. We had it slated for the auction block next month." She looked up at me over her glasses. "Are you family?" "He was my father," I said. The words felt strange and powerful on my tongue. Her expression softened. "Oh, well, I'm glad to see it's staying in the family. Your dad was a good man. Quiet, but a hard worker." She turned back to the screen. "All right, with penalties and interest, the total comes to $2,412. I counted out the cash from the envelope I'd brought. The bills were old and soft. She took them without comment, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. She stamped my receipt with a satisfying thud. "There you go. You're all paid up. Good for another year." I folded the receipt and put it carefully in my pocket. It felt more valuable than the money I had just spent. It was a stake in the ground, a claim. As I walked out of the office, I felt 2 inches taller. On the way out of town, I stopped at the hardware store. I bought work gloves, heavy-duty trash bags, a bucket, soap, and a new, sturdy broom. I was investing in my future. By the end of the second week, the forge was clean. The tools were wiped down, their steel heads gleaming dully in the light. The anvil was polished. The hearth was cleared of debris. The place was still a ruin, but it was my ruin. Now came the real test: lighting the fire. My father's journal had a whole chapter on it. It wasn't as simple as throwing wood in and striking a match. A forge fire needed to be deep, hot, and controllable. It needed a specific kind of coal and a specific way of being built. I found the coal bin, still half full of what he'd left behind. I followed his instructions to the letter, layering kindling, then small lumps of coal, then larger ones, creating a mound in the center of the hearth. The final step was the bellows. I patched the cracked leather with a repair kit from the hardware store, praying it would hold. I took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to a father I was just getting to know, and pushed down on the long wooden handle. The bellows let out a wheezing groan, then a rush of air. A tiny ember in the kindling glowed. I pushed again. The ember grew brighter. I fell into a rhythm, pushing and pulling, the bellows breathing life into the fire. Smoke, thick and acrid, filled the forge before finding its way up the chimney. And then, a flame. A small, hesitant tongue of orange. It licked at the coal, which began to glow, then pop, then catch. The fire grew, a living, breathing thing in the heart of the stone. The roar filled the cavernous space. The heat washed over my face. I had done it. I had brought the forge back to life. Just as I was starting to feel a sense of fragile victory, the outside world intruded. A letter arrived at the post office, forwarded to general delivery in Oak Ridge. It was from a law firm in Portland, representing a company called Ridgeback Development. They were making a cash offer for my 5.5 acres. A very generous offer, $75,000. More money than I could comprehend. I stared at the letter, my blood running cold. Why? Why now? It couldn't be a coincidence. Land that was worth less than $10,000 a few weeks ago was suddenly worth nearly 10 times that. They must have found something out. Maybe a change in zoning laws, or they were buying up all the surrounding parcels for a larger project. The money was a temptation, a poison dart aimed at the heart of my resolve. That same day, my phone, which I had charged in the library in town, buzzed with a text. It was from Leo. "Hey, heard you were out at that old cabin. Just wanted to make sure you were okay. Worried about you." The transparent lie of it made me sick. He wasn't worried. He was sniffing around. He must have heard about the developer's interest. He was trying to get his hooks back in me, to get a piece of the action. He still saw me as a resource to be exploited. I deleted the text without replying. I walked back to the cabin, took the developer's letter, and fed it to the flames in the wood stove. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. That was my answer. The first time I heated a piece of metal, I was clumsy and afraid. I used a pair of tongs to pull a small iron rod from the roaring heart of the fire. It glowed with a terrifying, brilliant yellow-white light. The heat was immense. I carried it to the anvil, my hands trembling. I picked up a hammer. It felt alien in my grip. I swung. The hammer glanced off the rod, sending a shower of sparks into the air and a painful vibration up my arm. The rod skittered off the anvil and fell to the floor, where it hissed against the damp stone. It was a complete failure. I wanted to cry. I wanted to give up. Then I remembered a line from my father's journal, which I now kept open on a workbench near the anvil. The first 100 are for the scrap pile. The 101st is for you. Don't be afraid to fail. Every bad swing teaches you something. So I picked up the rod with the tongs, put it back in the fire, and tried again, and again, and again. For days, I did nothing but heat and hit metal. I made ugly, twisted, useless shapes. I burned myself. I bruised my knuckles. My arms felt like they were going to fall off. But slowly, something began to shift. The rhythm of the work started to seep into my bones. The dance between the fire, the anvil, and the hammer. I learned to read the color of the metal to know its temperature. I learned to anticipate the way it would move, the way it would yield. I learned to listen to it, just as my father had written. The sound of the hammer striking the hot iron changed from a dull thud to a clear, ringing song. I wasn't fighting the metal anymore. I was working with it. My 101st piece was a simple hook. It wasn't perfect. The curve was a little uneven, the tip slightly malformed. But it was a hook. It was recognizable. It was functional. I had taken a straight, rigid piece of iron and transformed it into something new. I held it in my hand, still warm, and I felt a surge of pride so pure and powerful it brought tears to my eyes. This was better than money. This was creation. My inheritance, I realized, wasn't the land or the forge or even the craft. It was the resilience embedded in the work itself. Leo had taken my mother's legacy, an inheritance of money, which was finite and vulnerable. My father had left me an inheritance of labor, of fire and iron, which was infinite. He had given me a way to build my own value, to forge my own security. Home wasn't a place Leo could take from me. Home was the heat of the fire on my face. Home was the weight of the hammer in my hand. Home was the ringing of the anvil. It was something I was building, blow by blow, with my own two hands. One afternoon, a rusty pickup truck rumbled up the trail to the clearing. An old man with a weathered face and kind, curious eyes got out. He leaned against the fence post, watching the smoke curl from the forge's chimney. "Been wondering who was making all that racket," he called out. "Haven't seen smoke from that chimney in 15 years. I walked out to meet him, wiping my sweaty hands on my jeans. "It's me, Ilara. Michael O'Connell was my father." The man's eyes widened. He broke into a slow smile. "Well, I'll be. I'm Hank. Lived on the next ridge over my whole life. Knew your dad. He was a good man, a hell of a smith." He gestured towards his truck. "Made the hinges on my barn doors. Still swing as true as the day he put 'em on. Strongest things I own." He looked from me to the forge and back again. "Glad to see someone's lighting the fire again." He would have liked that. That simple validation from a stranger, that connection to my father's life, was worth more than any developer's check. I wasn't a ghost in a ruin anymore. I was a part of this place. I was the blacksmith's daughter. It's been a year now. The forge is my life. I'm not making grand sculptures or elaborate gates. Not yet. I'm making simple things. Hooks, hinges, fireplace tools. Simple, honest, useful things. I sell them at the farmer's market in town every Saturday. Hank was my first customer. He bought a set of wall hooks and told everyone who would listen that Michael O'Connell's girl had the gift. The money I make isn't much, but it's enough. It pays for my food, for coal, for the taxes on this land. Every dollar is mine, earned with sweat and fire. I am beholden to no one. The cabin is still a ruin, but it's a warmer ruin. I've patched the roof, replaced the broken window, and cleaned it from top to bottom. The wood stove keeps the chill at bay. It's home. Sometimes, at night, I sit at my father's table and read his journal. I feel him here with me, a quiet, encouraging presence. I think about Leo sometimes, but he feels like a character from a book I read a long time ago. The anger is gone, replaced by a strange sort of pity. He thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything of value. But he was so blinded by greed that he couldn't see the difference between currency and worth. He took the cash, and he left the treasure. He left me with nothing. And in that nothing, I found everything. My father's letter gave me a choice. Not just about a forge, but about what kind of person I wanted to be. We all face those choices, in big ways and small. Every day, we choose what we build and what we let fall to ruin. Maybe your story isn't about a hidden forge and a secret inheritance, but I bet it's about finding strength when you thought you had none left. I bet it's about rebuilding after a storm. It's about looking at the wreckage of your life and finding the one solid piece you can build on. If this story meant something to you, if it sparked something in you, please subscribe and become part of this community. These are the stories that matter, the ones about getting back up. Share your own story in the comments below. Tell me about the time you had to rebuild. Tell me about the inheritance that no one could take from you. Because every story of resilience deserves to be heard. And I promise you, I'll be here, reading them, while the fire roars and the hammer rings.
Let's see. Pelia has a story? What the? Okay. Yeah, because right now, it's like, okay, here's the thing, all right? Currently, like, in my regular games rotation, I play, well, I guess this. Phobia, Stardew. At least for the stream. And then, like, I played Marvel Rivals and Overwatch solo queue ranked. And then I also play Guild Wars 2, which is like an MMORPG. Hi, it's me, but purple. Hey, Mocha. You're never running out of games, Dino. Well, here's the thing. Guild Wars 2 has been going on for like 10, 12 years, I think, at this point. So, like, I've been playing that forever since beta. And then there are just honestly a bunch of games coming out that I'm really excited for here. It's a live server. Of course, they boot you when you're gone for 5 minutes. Yeah, that's really any live server game, Clara. I don't know where to put this. Oh my god, Marmalade's awake. Hi. Do I like this here? I kind of feel like I don't. Also, hey Koopy Cake. Good to see you. How's it going? I don't think I like this here. I'm dying, Ellie. Maybe I'm like trying to figure out where I'm gonna put this thing, and I have no idea. No, this looks terrible.